If you're dealing with a nightmare neighbor situation right now, grab a drink and buckle up, because this story might just give you some ideas on how to handle it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Let me take you through what might be the most ridiculous neighbor dispute I've ever experienced. One that started with a boat and ended with, well, you'll see. But first, let me paint you a picture of how this whole mess began. I've lived in my house on Maple Grove Street for about 5 years now. It's a quiet suburban neighborhood where most people take pride in their properties. You know the type. Manicured lawns, kids playing in the cul-de-sac, neighbors walking their dogs in the evening. My next-door neighbors, Dave and Susan Wilson, have been here even longer, 15 years. Dave's a retired police officer who spends his days tending to his prized rose garden, and Susan works from home as a consultant. They're the kind of neighbors everyone wishes they had. The house on the other side of me belonged to an elderly couple who moved to Florida last spring. That's when Ryan and Megan Parker moved in. At first, everything seemed fine. They seemed like a normal couple in their mid-30s. Ryan works in sales, though I've never quite figured out what he sells, and Megan runs some kind of social media business from home. They have 2 kids, a dog, and as I would soon discover, a 28-foot boat that would become the bane of my existence. The first few months were perfectly normal. We'd wave hello, make small talk about the weather, and go about our lives. I even helped Ryan jump-start his car one morning when his battery died. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags when he mentioned having issues with neighbors at their old place. But you know how hindsight works. Everything changed 3 months ago, right as summer was kicking into high gear. I came home from work one Friday evening to find a massive boat parked in Ryan's driveway, but not just in his driveway. The boat and trailer extended well past his property line, blocking half of my driveway at an angle that made it nearly impossible to pull into my garage without performing a 15-point turn. I figured it was temporary. Maybe he was just unloading something, or perhaps he'd move it to proper storage the next day. I'm a reasonable person, so I didn't make a fuss that first night. I just carefully maneuvered around it and went inside. The next morning, I decided to have a friendly chat with Ryan about the boat situation. I walked over around 10 a.m. when I noticed him in his front yard washing the massive vessel. It was a Viking sport fishing boat, probably worth more than both our houses combined. Ryan was beaming with pride as he polished the chrome fixtures. "Hey, Ryan," I called out, trying to keep things casual. "That's quite a boat you've got there." "Thanks," he grinned, not picking up on my tone. "Just picked her up yesterday. Got a great deal because the previous owner needed to sell fast. Can you believe it?" I cleared my throat. "Listen, I noticed it's blocking part of my driveway. Any chance you could adjust how it's parked?" That's when I got my first glimpse of the real Ryan Parker. His friendly demeanor shifted instantly, his face hardening into something entirely different. "It's not blocking your driveway," he said flatly. "There's plenty of room to get by." I took out my phone and snapped a quick picture. "Actually, it extends about 4 feet into my driveway space. See?" I showed him the photo. "That's my property." "Line," he insisted, pointing to a spot that was clearly well into my driveway. I had it surveyed. Now, I knew for a fact that wasn't true. Dave, my retired cop neighbor, had shown me the actual property lines when I first moved in, and we'd even installed fence posts accordingly. But Ryan wasn't interested in facts. "Look," I tried again, "I'm just asking if you could angle it differently, or maybe find somewhere else to store it. It's making it really difficult to get in and out of my garage." "Not my problem," Ryan shrugged, turning back to his boat. "Maybe you need to learn how to drive better." I stood there for a moment, stunned by his response. Charlie Thompson, who lives across the street and is something of a car enthusiast, was working on his classic Mustang in his driveway and had witnessed the whole exchange. He caught my eye and shook his head in disbelief. That evening, I decided to document everything, just in case. I took several photos of the boat's position from different angles, including measurements showing how far it extended into my driveway. I also started a detailed log of all interactions with Ryan, including that first conversation. Linda Garcia, who's lived on the corner for 20 years, stopped by while walking her dog. "I see you've met Ryan's new toy," she said, eyeing the boat. "Did he tell you about his plans to install a boat lift in his backyard?" I thought she was joking. Our property's back up to a small decorative pond, definitely not something you could actually use for a boat. But Linda wasn't laughing. He was telling everyone at the block party last week about his vision for a private dock system. When Mike Anderson, you know Mike, the marine mechanic from 2 doors down, tried to explain why that wouldn't work, Ryan accused him of being jealous and threatened to report him for running a business from his home. I had missed the block party because of a work trip, but this information was illuminating. It seemed the boat was just the beginning of what could become a much bigger issue. That night, I did some research on local ordinances regarding boat storage and driveway obstruction. I also ordered a security camera system. Nothing fancy, just enough to monitor my driveway and the street in front of my house. Something told me I might need it. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of what would become a 3-month nightmare involving city code enforcement, the police, a maritime lawyer, yes, really, and eventually a community meeting that would change everything. But before I get into all that, let me know in the comments if you've ever dealt with a neighbor from hell. Subscribe to see how this story unfolds, because trust me, it gets much, much crazier. Things took an interesting turn the following week when Ryan decided to start what he called his boat maintenance schedule. Every morning at precisely 5 a.m., the roar of twin marine engines would echo through our quiet street, rattling windows and setting off car alarms. The first time it happened, I thought someone was breaking into the neighborhood with a tank. Dave Wilson, my retired cop neighbor, was the first one out of his house that morning, still in his bathrobe. I watched from my kitchen window as he marched over to Ryan's driveway, where Ryan sat in the captain's chair, apparently checking some gauges. "Turn that thing off!" Dave shouted over the engines. "People are trying to sleep." Ryan just pointed to his ears and shrugged, pretending he couldn't hear over the noise. That's when Susan Wilson, still in her pajamas, started recording the whole scene on her phone. Smart woman, she'd dealt with enough neighbor disputes over the years to know documentation is everything. The engines ran for exactly 45 minutes, just long enough for most of the neighborhood to miss their morning routines and be late for work. As soon as Ryan shut them down, he hopped out of the boat with a satisfied smirk and headed inside, ignoring the small crowd of angry neighbors that had gathered on their lawns. Mike Anderson, our resident marine mechanic, was shaking his head in disbelief. "That's not even proper maintenance," he muttered. "He's just running the engines dry. If anything, he's damaging them." But when Mike tried to approach Ryan later, that day, to offer some professional advice, Ryan accused him of being a jealous hater and threatened to report him to the Marine Mechanics Association, which, as Mike later told me, isn't even a real thing. The daily engine tests continued, and with each passing day, Ryan seemed to add new elements to his maintenance routine. By day 3, he'd set up massive work lights on telescoping poles, creating what looked like a stadium lighting system that coincidentally shone directly into my bedroom window. On day 4, he added a booming stereo system that blasted what he called boat music, a strange mix of Jimmy Buffett and death metal that made the neighborhood dogs howl in protest. Emily Anderson, Mike's wife and a local elementary school teacher, started documenting how the noise was affecting her students who lived in the neighborhood. "They're falling asleep in class," she told me one afternoon. "These kids are exhausted because they can't sleep through Ryan's morning boat concerts. That's when Tim and Angela Foster, who lived 3 houses down, offered to help. Tim worked in IT and had recently installed a sophisticated security camera system around his property. "I've got clear footage of every morning's disruption," he said, including timestamps and decibel readings. Angela, ever the organizer, had already started a spreadsheet tracking all of Ryan's violations of local noise ordinances. But Ryan was just getting started. One morning, I woke up to find him attempting to construct what he called a temporary boat shelter, essentially a massive tarp structure supported by PVC pipes that extended well onto my property. The contraption looked like a rejected circus tent, and more importantly, it was definitely not up to code. When I stepped outside to confront him about it, Ryan was on a ladder, attempting to secure one of the supports to my garage without my permission. "Don't worry," he called down. "This is just phase 1.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Wait until you see the climate-controlled enclosure I'm planning." I immediately called Greg Martinez, our city code enforcement officer. Greg had already received multiple complaints about Ryan's boat situation, but this new development kicked things into high gear. Within an hour, he was on site, citation book in hand. "Mr. Parker," Greg started, trying to maintain his professional composure, "you can't build structures across property lines without permits or permission." Ryan, still on his ladder, launched into a bizarre rant about maritime law and how his boat's needs superseded local building codes. He'd apparently been doing some creative research on YouTube and was convinced that his boat had special rights because it was technically a vessel in refuge. Jenny Reynolds, Mark's wife and an actual lawyer, happened to be walking by during this exchange. She stopped dead in her tracks when she heard Ryan's legal theories. "That's not how any of this works," she said, almost dropping her morning coffee. "Maritime law doesn't apply to boats parked in suburban driveways." But Ryan wouldn't hear. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started recording everyone, claiming we were all part of a conspiracy to deny his riparian rights, another term he'd clearly learned from the internet, but didn't quite understand. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when Ryan announced he was declaring his property an independent port authority. He actually went to the hardware store and came back with a giant roll of yellow caution tape, which he proceeded to string around his property and a good portion of mine, marking what he called his maritime jurisdiction. By this point, even Megan, Ryan's wife, seemed to be reaching her limit. I overheard her on the phone in their backyard, apparently talking to her mother. "No, Mom, he hasn't lost his mind. He's just really excited about the boat. Yes, I know declaring our driveway a sovereign port territory seems extreme." The breaking point came when Ryan decided to install what he called a navigation beacon, essentially a rotating spotlight, mounted on his roof that swept across the neighborhood all night long, supposedly to guide his boat safely home, despite the fact that it hadn't moved from the driveway in weeks. That's when Jason Cooper, our HOA president, finally got involved. He'd been trying to stay neutral, but even he couldn't ignore what had essentially become a makeshift lighthouse in a suburban neighborhood. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following evening, but Ryan had one more surprise in store. On the morning of the meeting, I woke up to find Ryan had somehow acquired a ship's horn, a massive industrial-grade horn that he'd mounted to his boat's cabin. At exactly 4:30 a.m., a full 30 minutes earlier than his usual start time, the horn blasted a sound that could only be described as a cruise ship having an anxiety attack. Car alarms went off up and down the street. Dogs started barking. Children cried. And somewhere in the distance we could hear the wail of police sirens approaching. Officer Kevin Brooks and Officer Amanda Taylor, who'd already been out to our street multiple times that week for noise complaints, arrived to find what looked like a maritime-themed war zone. Ryan was standing on his boat's bridge, wearing a captain's hat and what appeared to be a homemade admiral's uniform, blasting the horn at irregular intervals while shouting something about asserting his maritime presence. The next few hours would involve 3 different police units, a representative from the Coast Guard, who was very confused about being called to a suburban neighborhood, and eventually a crane operator who would play a crucial role in what happened next. But that story deserves its own telling, along with the emergency HOA meeting that would fundamentally change our neighborhood's policies on watercraft storage. One thing was becoming crystal clear. This wasn't just about a boat blocking a driveway anymore. This was about a man's descent into maritime madness, and it was about to get even more complicated. The HOA meeting was just hours away, and Ryan had already announced his intention to attend in full captain's regalia, armed with what he called his maritime legal defense. A stack of documents he'd printed from various questionable websites about boat owners' rights. The neighborhood was divided between those who found the whole situation hilarious and those who were one horn blast away from selling their homes. As for me, I was starting to wonder if moving was easier than dealing with a neighbor who thought he was running a port authority from his driveway, but something told me this story was far from over, and the upcoming HOA meeting would prove to be just the beginning of an even more bizarre chapter in our neighborhood's history. The emergency HOA meeting that Thursday evening felt more like a maritime court tribunal than a neighborhood gathering. The community center was packed, with residents spilling out into the hallway. Jason Cooper, our HOA president, had to move the meeting to the main hall to accommodate everyone who showed up. Apparently, Ryan's boat saga had become the hottest ticket in town. I arrived early, armed with my documentation binder containing photos, noise readings, and a detailed timeline of events. Tim Foster had brought his laptop to show the security footage, and Angela had printed copies of her meticulous spreadsheet for everyone. The Andersons, Mike and Emily, set up a small display showing the actual requirements for proper boat maintenance, complete with manufacturer guidelines that proved Ryan's 5 a.m. engine tests were not only unnecessary, but potentially harmful. At precisely 7 p.m., Ryan made his grand entrance. True to his word, he was wearing what appeared to be a custom-made admiral's uniform, complete with gold braiding and an impressive array of medals that I'm pretty sure came from his kids' sports tournaments. Megan trailed behind him, looking like she wanted to disappear into the walls. He was carrying a massive roll of nautical charts, despite the fact that we were discussing a boat that hadn't moved from his driveway in over a month. Beth Sullivan, one of the HOA board members, nearly choked on her coffee when Ryan unfurled his first chart across the meeting table. It was a hand-drawn map of our neighborhood, but he'd relabeled everything in maritime terms. My driveway was marked as disputed waters. His property was labeled Port Parker, and the neighborhood pond was designated as the Great Northern Sea. Jason tried to bring the meeting to order, but Ryan immediately interrupted with what he called a point of maritime procedure. He then spent 15 minutes arguing that the HOA board needed to recognize his self-proclaimed authority as Admiral of the Northern Residential Waters before any discussion could proceed. "Mr. Parker," Jason said, pinching the bridge of his. "Note that this is a homeowners association meeting, not a naval command center. Can we please focus on the actual issues at hand?" That's when Ryan pulled out his legal defense, a stack of papers that turned out to be printouts from a website called Sovereign Boat Captains of America, mixed with pages from what appeared to be a pirate novel. He began reading from them in what he clearly thought was a British naval accent. According to maritime law, Ryan proclaimed, adjusting his captain's hat. "Any vessel in distress has the right to safe harbor. My boat is technically in distress because it's not currently in water, therefore." Jenny Reynolds, our resident lawyer, couldn't take it anymore. "That's not how any of this works," she exclaimed. "You can't just declare maritime law in a suburban driveway." But Ryan was prepared for this argument. He pulled out a plastic spray bottle and began misting the area around his chair with water. "I hereby declare this section of the community center maritime territory by virtue of these international waters I'm creating," he announced, continuing to spray water on the floor. Linda Garcia, who'd been quietly knitting in the corner until this point, set down her needles with a sharp click. "Ryan," she said in her no-nonsense teacher voice, "you're making a puddle on the new flooring we just had installed." The meeting continued to descend into maritime chaos as Ryan attempted to present his case. He'd created a PowerPoint presentation titled "The Constitutional Rights of Boats in Residential Zones, a Captain's Perspective." The slides included clip art of pirates, quotes from SpongeBob SquarePants, which he cited as maritime legal precedent, and a detailed plan for converting the neighborhood into what he called a dry dock community. Charlie Thompson, usually the quietest person in any room, finally spoke up. "Ryan, my grandfather was actually in the Navy, and I can tell you with certainty that nothing you're saying has any basis in maritime or any other kind of law." Ryan responded by pulling out a conch shell and attempting to call the meeting to order by blowing into it. The resulting sound was less majestic sea call and more dying goose, but he seemed pleased with himself. Meanwhile, Dave Wilson had been quietly documenting everything on his phone, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. Susan was updating her neighborhood watch group chat, which had become less about suspicious activities and more about Ryan's daily boat-related antics. The meeting reached its peak absurdity when Ryan unveiled his compromise solution, an elaborate plan to dig a canal from his driveway to the decorative pond, complete with locks and a drawbridge that would span my driveway. He'd even made a model using his kids' Lego sets. "The canal will solve everything," he explained, moving a tiny Lego boat through the plastic waterway. "I'll have water access, and my neighbor can still use his driveway when the drawbridge is down." Jason Cooper, who'd been remarkably patient until this point, finally put his foot down. "Ryan, we're not turning the neighborhood into Venice. This meeting is about your boat blocking your neighbor's driveway and your violations of noise ordinances." That's when Ryan played what he thought was his trump card. He pulled out a laminated document that he claimed was a letter of marque and reprisal, giving him special boat-related rights. Upon closer inspection, it was clearly printed from a novelty website that generated fake pirate documents. Megan, who had been sinking lower in her chair throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. "Ryan, honey, maybe we should just look into proper boat storage." But Ryan was too far gone. He'd moved on to explaining his plans for establishing a neighborhood navy and implementing maritime law throughout the subdivision. The meeting took an unexpected turn when Greg Martinez, the code enforcement officer, arrived with some interesting news. He'd done some research on Ryan's boat registration and discovered something that would change everything. But before he could share his findings, Ryan attempted to invoke what he called maritime immunity and tried to leave the meeting by walking in a zigzag pattern, claiming he was tacking against the wind despite being indoors. As Greg attempted to present his findings, Ryan interrupted by declaring that the community center was now international waters and attempted to claim salvage rights on the coffee maker in the corner. Beth Sullivan, who'd brought the coffee maker from home, was not amused. The situation might have continued spiraling into further nautical nonsense if it weren't for an unexpected intervention from the most unlikely source. But that turn of events, involving a surprise visit from someone who would completely change the trajectory of this maritime mayhem, deserves its own telling. What happened next would involve an impromptu visit from the state's boat registration office, a revelation about the boat's actual ownership, and a twist that nobody, especially Ryan, saw coming. The neighborhood was about to learn that sometimes the most interesting stories happen not on the high seas, but in the driveways of suburban homes, where self-proclaimed admirals wage wars over parking spaces and maritime law. The morning after, the HOA meeting brought an unexpected visitor to our neighborhood. A sleek black SUV with government plates pulled up in front of Ryan's house just as he was preparing for his daily 5 a.m. engine maintenance ritual. A woman in a crisp navy blue suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase with the state's Marine Vessel Registration Office seal. Monica Delgado, senior maritime fraud investigator, didn't waste any time with pleasantries. She walked straight up to Ryan's boat, pulled out a handheld scanner, and began checking the hull identification numbers. Ryan, still in his makeshift admiral's uniform from the night before, had he slept in it, came scrambling out of his house. "Halt! You're entering sovereign maritime territory," Ryan shouted, waving what appeared to be a pool noodle fashioned into a makeshift scepter. Monica didn't even look up from her scanner. "Mr. Parker," she said, continuing her inspection, "I'm here regarding some discrepancies in this vessel's registration and ownership history." She paused, making a note on her tablet. "Also, I should inform you that declaring your driveway sovereign maritime territory is not a thing." By this point, the neighborhood's early risers had started gathering to watch the scene unfold. Dave Wilson was pretending to trim his rose bushes while clearly eavesdropping. Susan had coincidentally decided to do her morning yoga on their front lawn instead of her usual spot in the backyard. Tim Foster's security cameras had mysteriously all turned to focus on Ryan's driveway. Monica pulled out a thick folder from her briefcase. "Mr. Parker, according to our records, this vessel was reported stolen from a marina in Florida 3 months ago. The seller you bought it from wasn't the legal owner." Ryan's face went through an impressive range of colors, finally settling on a shade somewhere between seasick and panic. "But I have documentation," he sputtered, running inside and returning with a crumpled envelope. "See? Bill of sale and everything?" Monica examined the documents with the patience of someone who'd seen it all before. "Mr. Parker, this bill of sale is printed on paper from Office Depot. It's signed by Captain Jack Sparrow. Did this not seem suspicious to you?" That's when Megan came outside, took one look at the situation, and sat down hard on their front steps. "Ryan," she said in an eerily calm voice, "did you buy a stolen boat?" "It wasn't stolen," Ryan protested. "Captain Jack said he needed to sell it quickly because he was being pursued by the British Navy." Even he seemed to realize how ridiculous this sounded as he said it out loud. Monica was typing rapidly on her tablet. "You paid in cash, well below market value, and accepted documentation signed by a fictional pirate. The transaction took place in a Walmart parking lot at midnight. The seller insisted on wearing an eye patch and referred to himself exclusively as the scallywag of scintillating savings." Linda Garcia, who had come outside to check her mail for the third time in 10 minutes, couldn't suppress a snort of laughter. Charlie Thompson was recording everything on his phone, muttering something about this being better than any reality TV show he'd ever watched. "But what about maritime law?" Ryan asked weakly, his captain's hat now slightly askew. "Don't I have rights as a boat owner?" "Mr. Parker," Monica replied, not looking up from her tablet, "maritime law actually has quite a lot to say about purchasing stolen vessels. None of it works in your favor." That's when things got even more interesting. A second vehicle pulled into the street, a tow truck specifically designed for hauling boats. Ryan's eyes went wide with panic. He made a dash for his boat, scrambling up the ladder and barricading himself in the cabin. "You'll never take her!" he shouted through the cabin window. "We have a special bond. She chose me." Monica sighed the sigh of someone who had clearly dealt with self-proclaimed boat captains before. She pulled out her phone and made a quick call. Within minutes, Officer Kevin Brooks arrived on the scene, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Is he barricaded in the boat again?" Kevin asked Monica, who just nodded. "Third time this week we've had to deal with maritime-related incidents in this neighborhood." Ryan had started playing sea shanties through the boat's sound system, apparently thinking this would somehow help his legal situation. The sounds of "What shall we do with the drunken sailor" echoed through the morning air as Monica and Officer Brooks discussed how to proceed. Meanwhile, Mike Anderson, our resident marine mechanic, had been examining the boat from a safe distance. "Those registration numbers have definitely been altered," he called out. "And that's not even the right model year. This is a 2020, not a 2023 like the paperwork claims." Ryan's voice boomed through the boat's PA system. "I invoke the ancient right of parley." "This isn't Pirates of the Caribbean, Mr. Parker," Monica called back. "Please come out of the boat. We need to discuss the proper procedures for returning stolen property." That's when Megan finally lost her patience. She marched up to the boat, grabbed the PA microphone wire, and yanked it out. "Ryan Matthew Parker," she yelled. "Get out of that stolen boat right now, or so help me, I'm calling your mother." The threat of maternal intervention seemed to have an effect. The cabin door slowly opened, and Ryan emerged, his captain's hat now completely crooked. "But what about my maritime dreams?" he asked plaintively. "Your maritime dreams," Megan replied, "just cost us our entire savings and might get you arrested. Get down here." As Ryan descended the boat ladder with as much dignity as he could muster, which wasn't much, Monica was already coordinating with the tow truck driver to prepare the boat for transport. That's when Ryan made one last desperate attempt to save his nautical aspirations. "Wait!" he cried out. "What if I told you I've discovered ancient maritime bylaws that give me squatters' rights to any vessel I've maintained for more than 3 consecutive sunrises?" Monica didn't even pause in her paperwork. "That's not a thing, Mr. Parker, though I have to admit, you're getting creative with these maritime law theories." The neighborhood had gathered in force by now. Beth Sullivan was passing out coffee to the growing crowd of spectators. Jason Cooper was already drafting a memo about updating the HOA bylaws to include specific language about fictional maritime law claims. Angela Foster had started a new spreadsheet titled "Things Ryan Made," up about maritime law. But the real surprise came when Monica revealed the boat's true owner and their plans to arrive that afternoon to reclaim their vessel. The identity of this person would not only change the entire narrative, but would also lead to one of the most unexpected resolutions our neighborhood had ever seen. However, before that could happen, Ryan had one more bizarre maritime scheme up his sleeve, involving a kiddie pool, a borrowed GPS unit, and a very confused pizza delivery driver who would become an unwitting participant in what Ryan called Operation Nautical Freedom. And as Monica and Officer Brooks were processing the paperwork for the boat's seizure, Ryan launched what he called Operation Nautical Freedom. It started with him rushing into his garage and emerging with an inflatable kiddie pool, 3 bags of water balloons, and his son's toy GPS unit. The look of determination on his face suggested this wasn't going to be a simple surrender of maritime dreams. "If I can't have a real boat," Ryan declared, dragging the kiddie pool onto his front lawn, "I'll create my own sovereign water territory." He began frantically filling water balloons from the garden hose while muttering something about international water rights and minimum water depth requirements for declaring a private port. Megan stood in their doorway, phone in hand, apparently texting someone. "I've called his sister," she announced to no one in particular. "She's the only one who can talk sense into him when he gets like this." Meanwhile, a very confused pizza delivery driver had pulled up to Ryan's house. As it turned out, Ryan had ordered 15 large pizzas to be delivered to what he'd listed on the order as Port Parker Emergency Supply Station. The delivery driver, a college student named Josh, looked increasingly concerned as Ryan attempted to pay him in what appeared to be homemade maritime currency, printed on printer paper with pictures of Ryan's face wearing different sailor hats. "Sir," Josh said, holding the stack of pizzas, "we only accept real money or credit cards. These are legally tender maritime dollars," Ryan insisted, trying to stuff the paper bills into Josh's delivery bag. "They're backed by the full faith and credit of the Parker Naval Reserve." Monica, who had been watching this scene unfold while waiting for additional paperwork to arrive, finally intervened. "I'll pay for the pizzas," she sighed, pulling out her government credit card. "Consider it evidence in an ongoing maritime fraud investigation." Ryan had now filled the kiddie pool and was attempting to create what he called a scale model of international waters, using his son's toy boats and some rubber ducks wearing tiny paper captain hats. He'd also set up his phone's GPS to give him coordinates, apparently believing this would somehow legitimize his kiddie pool as an official body of water. "According to maritime law," Ryan announced to the growing crowd of neighbors, "any body of water deep enough to float a vessel can be declared a shipping lane." He demonstrated by floating a rubber duck across the kiddie pool. Dave Wilson, who'd been quietly documenting everything on his phone, finally spoke up. "Ryan, that's not how any of this works. Also, your kiddie pool is leaking onto my rose garden." Indeed, Ryan's hasty setup had created a small stream that was now threatening Dave's prized roses. But Ryan was too busy implementing phase 2 of his plan to notice. He'd started calling local maritime supply stores, trying to order navigation buoys for his kiddie pool. "What do you mean you need a permit for buoys?" he argued into his phone. "This is international waters. I have sovereign immunity." The store clerk on the other end had apparently hung up, but Ryan continued his impassioned speech to the dial tone. Linda Garcia, who had been watching the scene while pretending to weed her flower beds, couldn't contain herself any longer. "Ryan, honey," she called out, "I think you might be taking this maritime thing a bit too far." That's when the pizza situation escalated. Ryan had started distributing slices to anyone who would sign his hastily drawn-up Port Parker Constitution, which mainly consisted of maritime-themed clip art and rules about proper saluting procedures in the presence of his rubber duck fleet. Charlie Thompson, always the voice of reason, attempted to intervene. "Ryan, maybe we should talk about this." But Ryan was already implementing phase 3 of his plan, which involved trying to convince the GPS unit that his kiddie pool was actually located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. "If I can just change the coordinates," he muttered, frantically pressing buttons on the toy device, "I can prove this is legitimate maritime territory." The situation took another turn when Ryan's sister Amy finally arrived. One look at her, brother, now sitting in the kiddie pool while wearing his captain's hat and surrounded by floating pizza boxes he was using as emergency rafts, and she knew exactly what she was dealing with. "Ryan," she said in a tone that suggested she'd handled similar situations before, "remember what happened with the hamster submarine incident in 3rd grade?" Ryan's face flushed red. "That was different. Mr. Whiskers volunteered for that mission." "The hamster did not volunteer," Amy countered, "and Mom had to buy the entire class new water bottles after you tried to convert them into a hamster navy." Monica, who had been taking detailed notes throughout this entire scene, looked up with interest. There's a prior incident involving maritime delusions and small animals? Amy sighed. When we were kids, Ryan once tried to establish a sovereign hamster nation in our basement. He gave all the hamsters ranks and tried to teach them to navigate using tiny compasses. This revelation seemed to break something in Ryan's maritime fantasy. He sat in his kiddie pool, surrounded by soggy pizza boxes and rubber ducks, looking slightly deflated. But maritime law, he said weakly. No more maritime law, Amy said firmly. Now get out of that pool before you catch a cold. Mom's on her way, and you know how she feels about your maritime phases. The mention of their mother seemed to finally snap Ryan back to reality. He looked around at the scene he'd created, the water balloon arsenal, the floating pizza armada, the rubber duck fleet, and his soaked admiral's uniform, and appeared to realize how far he'd gone. But just as it seemed the situation was finally under control, a new vehicle pulled into the street. A sleek yacht dealer's car, driven by none other than the actual owner of the stolen boat. The person who stepped out would not only bring the final twist to this maritime saga, but would also offer Ryan a chance at redemption in the most unexpected way. The real owner of the boat, as it turned out, was about to turn this entire situation on its head, leading to a resolution that nobody, especially Ryan, could have anticipated. But before that could happen, Ryan had to deal with one final maritime crisis involving the kiddie pool, an over-enthusiastic sprinkler system, and what would become known in neighborhood legend as the Great Rubber Duck Mutiny of 2025. The yacht dealer's car door opened, and out stepped Marcus Chen, CEO of one of the largest marine wildlife conservation organizations in the country. He was wearing a casual polo shirt with his organization's logo, looking more like someone ready for a day of beach cleanup than a man about to reclaim his stolen luxury vessel. Ryan, still sitting in his kiddie pool, surrounded by rubber ducks and soggy pizza boxes, froze mid-maritime declaration. The water from his impromptu sovereign sea had created a small stream down the driveway, carrying a flotilla of rubber ducks toward Marcus's feet. "Interesting water management system you've got here," Marcus commented, picking up one of the rubber ducks that had made its way to his shoes. The tiny paper captain's hat Ryan had taped to it was now drooping sadly over its plastic eye. Monica quickly stepped forward with her tablet. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming on such short notice. As you can see, the situation is a bit unique." Marcus surveyed the scene, the kiddie pool navy, the hastily constructed Port Parker sign, made from cardboard and glitter glue, and Ryan in his waterlogged admiral's uniform. Instead of showing anger or frustration, he did something unexpected. He laughed. "You know," Marcus said, walking toward the kiddie pool, "when I got the call about my stolen boat, I expected to find it stripped for parts or hidden in some warehouse. I definitely didn't expect to find it being used as the centerpiece of a suburban maritime micronation." Ryan's sister, Amy, who had been trying to convince her brother to exit his kiddie pool kingdom, paused her efforts. "You're not angry?" "Boo. Oh, I probably should be," Marcus admitted, rolling up his pants legs and, to everyone's surprise, sitting down on the lawn next to Ryan's pool. "But I have to admit, I'm kind of impressed by the commitment to the maritime theme. Though I'm not sure about the rubber duck admiralty." Ryan, still clutching his toy GPS unit, looked thoroughly confused. "You're impressed? Well," Marcus gestured at the elaborate setup, "you've certainly put more thought into maritime operations than most people I know with actual boats, even if your understanding of maritime law is creative." That's when Marcus noticed the detailed charts Ryan had drawn of the neighborhood pond. Despite their questionable legal status, the drawings showed a surprising understanding of water flow and marine ecosystems. "Did you make these?" Ryan nodded, still wary, but starting to look less like someone about to declare his kiddie pool a sovereign nation. I've been studying the pond's ecosystem. Did you know we have 3 different species of native fish living in there? Marcus leaned in to examine the charts more closely. These are actually pretty good observations, completely wrong about maritime jurisdiction, but the environmental impact notes are spot on. The neighborhood watched in amazement as Marcus and Ryan began an animated discussion about aquatic ecosystems, with Ryan gradually forgetting about his maritime sovereignty claims in favor of sharing his genuine knowledge about local marine life. Megan, who had been stress-eating a slice of evidence pizza, finally smiled for the first time that day. This is the first normal conversation about boats he's had in months. That's when Marcus made an unexpected proposal. You know, my organization runs a local marine education program at the community center. We could actually use someone with your enthusiasm for maritime matters, as long as you promise to stop trying to declare suburban driveways international waters. Ryan looked up from his charts, captain's hat slightly askew. You mean I could work with real boats? Legal ones, Monica quickly interjected from where she was still documenting everything, with proper registration and no fictional pirates involved in the purchase. Marcus nodded. We do everything by the book, actual maritime law, not the kind you found on Sovereign Captain. Come. But yes, you'd get to work with boats, teach kids about marine ecosystems, and maybe learn why we don't need navigation. Buoys and kiddie pools. The transformation in Ryan was immediate and remarkable. He stood up in his pool, causing a small tidal wave that sent his rubber duck fleet into disarray. I accept, but what about your stolen boat? Well, Marcus said, standing up and brushing grass off his pants. That's something we need to address. I can't just ignore the theft, but I think we might be able to work something out with the authorities, especially if you're willing to help us track down the real culprit, your friend Captain Jack. Monica, who had been quietly making calls, stepped forward. If Mr. Parker cooperates fully with the investigation and makes restitution, we might be able to work out an arrangement that doesn't involve pressing charges. But Ryan was already racing inside, leaving a trail of water behind him. He returned, moments later, with a file folder. I kept everything from the sale, business cards, receipts, even the napkin he wrote the meeting location on. Business cards? Monica asked skeptically. Ryan handed over a soggy card that read, Captain Jack's, Discount Maritime Emporium where every deal is a steal. Complete with a clip art parrot in the corner. This might actually help, Monica admitted, carefully placing the card in an evidence bag, though I question the wisdom of a boat thief having business cards printed. Meanwhile, Dave Wilson had been examining the kiddie pool's intrusion into his rose garden with increasing concern. Not to interrupt this touching moment of maritime redemption, but does anyone else notice that the pool is starting to collapse? He was right. Ryan's impromptu sovereign sea was beginning to bulge ominously on one side. Before anyone could react, the pool wall gave way, sending a wave of water, rubber ducks, and floating pizza boxes cascading across the lawn. Marcus watched as the rubber duck armada made a break for freedom down the street. Well, he said, I guess that's one way to decommission a naval force. But the great kiddie pool collapse of 2025 wasn't quite the end of the story. As neighbors scrambled to rescue wayward rubber ducks and soggy pizza boxes, a new figure appeared on the scene. Someone whose arrival would set in motion a chain of events that would not only solve the mystery of the stolen boat, but would also lead to what would become known in local legend as the Great Maritime Education Revolution of Maple Grove Street. The person stepping out of the newly arrived car was none other than the real Captain Jack, and his appearance would prove that sometimes the most unlikely situations can lead to the most unexpected opportunities for redemption, community building, and yes, even proper maritime education. The mysterious figure who stepped out of the car was nothing like what anyone expected. Instead of a shady boat thief, there stood Gerald Captain Jack Thompson, a 70-year-old retired maritime insurance investigator wearing cargo shorts and a shirt covered in tiny embroidered anchors. His arrival sent ripples through the already chaotic scene of rubber duck refugees and pizza box debris. "Someone called about questionable boat transactions," Gerald announced, pulling out a well-worn leather notebook. "I've been tracking this particular vessel for months." Monica's hand instinctively moved toward her badge. "Sir, are you confessing to selling stolen property?" Gerald let out a hearty laugh that seemed to startle the remaining rubber ducks. "Selling stolen property? Heavens no. I'm the one who's been trying to catch the real thief, though I must admit my methods are a bit unconventional." Ryan, still dripping from his kiddie pool disaster, perked up. "Wait, you're not really a discount boat dealer?" "Son," Gerald said, flipping through his notebook, "I'm the reason this boat ended up in your driveway. You see, after 40 years of investigating maritime insurance fraud the traditional way, I decided to try something different in retirement. I became what you might call a maritime bounty hunter." Marcus Chen raised an eyebrow. "A maritime bounty hunter? Well," Gerald shrugged, "someone has to track down all those stolen boats. Regular law enforcement is too busy, insurance companies are too slow, and most people don't even know their boats are missing until they show up in someone's suburban driveway, declaring itself a sovereign nation." Monica was frantically typing on her tablet. "So you're saying that I deliberately sold this boat to our enthusiastic friend here," Gerald gestured to Ryan, "because I knew he'd draw attention to it, and boy did you deliver. I haven't seen this much maritime drama since the great jet ski migration of 2019. Ryan looked simultaneously offended and impressed. "You used my maritime aspirations as a trap." "More like a spotlight," Gerald corrected. "The real thief has been watching this whole situation unfold. In fact," he turned and pointed directly at a car that had been parked across the street, "for the past hour. They're right over there." The car's engine suddenly roared to life, but before it could move, Dave Wilson calmly stepped into the street and placed his garden gnome collection in a perfect line across the road. The escape route blocked by an army of ceramic sentinels, the driver had no choice but to stay put. Officer Brooks approached the vehicle, only to discover the actual boat thief was none other than Earl the Pearl McGillicuddy, a notorious maritime crime boss known for stealing luxury vessels and selling them through a complex network of fake boat shows. "I would have gotten away with it too," Earl grumbled, as Officer Brooks led him away, "if it wasn't for that meddling suburban captain and his rubber duck navy." Meanwhile, Gerald was explaining his methodology to an increasingly fascinated Monica. "You see, most stolen boats disappear into private marinas or get shipped overseas, but if you can find someone with enough maritime enthusiasm and a complete misunderstanding of boat ownership laws, they'll accidentally help you catch the real criminal," Monica finished, shaking her head in amazement. Marcus Chen had been quietly observing the whole scene. So technically, Ryan was actually helping law enforcement, albeit unknowingly. "In his own unique way," Gerald agreed, "though I have to admit, the kiddie pool navy and maritime currency were unexpected additions to the operation." Ryan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "Does this mean I'm not in trouble?" "Well," Monica consulted her tablet, "since you were unknowingly part of a legitimate sting operation, and Mr. Chen seems more amused than angry, we might be able to work something out. Though we should probably discuss your attempts to establish international waters in residential areas." That's when Megan emerged from the house with a stack of papers. I found all his maritime law research. You might want to see this. The papers revealed that Ryan had actually stumbled onto some legitimate maritime environmental regulations during his late-night internet research sessions. Hidden among the fictional maritime laws and sovereign boat captain manifestos were detailed notes about local water conservation and marine ecosystem protection. Marcus picked up one of the papers. These observations about the neighborhood pond's ecosystem are actually quite thorough. Misguided in terms of maritime jurisdiction, but the environmental science is solid. Gerald nodded approvingly. You know, in all my years of investigating maritime fraud, I've never seen someone so accidentally helpful. Usually, people trying to establish sovereign boat nations are just trying to avoid parking tickets. The situation took another unexpected turn when Linda Garcia mentioned that the community center had been looking for someone to start an environmental education program. We have that pond that no one really knows how to maintain properly. Marcus's eyes lit up. You thinking what I'm thinking? A legitimate channel for maritime enthusiasm? Gerald suggested. Community-based environmental education? Monica added. A chance to wear my captain's hat for actual educational purposes? Ryan asked hopefully. And that's how the Maple Grove Maritime Education and Environmental Conservation Program was born, though not before dealing with one final maritime crisis involving the escaped rubber duck navy, a confused mail carrier, and what would become known as the Great Pond Conservation Revolution. The story might have ended there, with Ryan finding a legitimate outlet for his maritime interests and the stolen boat mystery solved. However, the arrival of Earl the Pearl McGillicuddy's former partner, a mysterious figure known only as the Admiral, would soon prove that the maritime adventures of Maple Grove Street were far from over. But before that could unfold, there was still the matter of the rubber duck rescue operation, which had now taken on the proportions of a full-scale maritime emergency response drill. The arrival of the Admiral happened on what had started as a relatively normal Tuesday morning. The neighborhood was still adjusting to its new reality. Ryan had traded his makeshift naval uniform for a proper environmental educator's polo shirt, and the community center pond was slowly being transformed into a legitimate environmental education site. But normal on Maple Grove Street had become a relative term. A pristine white Mercedes pulled up to the curb, and out stepped a woman in her 60s wearing a tailored nautical blazer with actual military medals. Unlike Ryan's homemade decorations, these were genuine naval honors. Patricia, the Admiral, Blackwood had arrived, and she was about to turn our newly peaceful neighborhood into the center of the largest maritime fraud investigation the state had ever seen. So this is where Earl decided to hide his operation, she mused, surveying the street with the calculated gaze of someone who had commanded actual naval vessels. Her eyes settled on the remaining evidence of Ryan's kiddie pool navy, a few stray rubber ducks still hiding in Dave Wilson's rose bushes. Gerald, Captain Jack Thompson, who had stayed in town to help set up the community's new environmental program, recognized her immediately. "Everyone inside now!" he shouted, displaying surprising agility for a 70-year-old as he herded neighbors toward their homes. Patricia smiled, a gesture that somehow made her look more formidable. Now, Gerald, is that any way to greet an old colleague?" Monica Delgado, who had been helping Ryan organize environmental education permits, emerged from the community center with her tablet at the ready. Patricia Blackwood, the former naval intelligence officer who disappeared 10 years ago? "Disappeared is such a dramatic word," Patricia replied, adjusting her perfectly pressed sleeve. "I merely relocated my expertise to the private sector." That's when Ryan, wearing his new official Maple Grove Environmental Educator badge, made what could generously be called a tactical error. He approached Patricia with the enthusiastic obliviousness that had become his trademark. "Those medals are amazing," he gushed. "Would you like to see our educational pond facility? We're installing a marine ecosystem observation deck." Patricia's expression shifted from military severity to genuine surprise. "You're the sovereign boat nation guy?" She turned to Gerald. "This is who you used to catch Earl. He has a certain maritime charm," Gerald admitted, still positioned protectively between Patricia and the neighbors. "Fascinating," Patricia murmured, studying Ryan like a scientist, observing a particularly interesting specimen. "You know, your little sovereign nation stunt actually disrupted one of the largest maritime criminal enterprises in the country." Marcus Chen, who had been quietly documenting everything for his marine conservation organization, stepped forward. "Are you saying Earl wasn't just stealing boats?" Patricia continued. "He was using them to move all sorts of interesting cargo. We've been tracking his operation for years. Then this gentleman," she gestured to Ryan, "creates such a spectacle that every maritime law enforcement agency in the region focuses on this quiet suburban street." Ryan beamed with pride until Monica quietly reminded him, "That's not actually a compliment." Linda Garcia, ever the voice of neighborhood wisdom, had been watching from her porch. "So why are you here now? Surely not to compliment Ryan's unintentional assistance in law enforcement." Patricia's smile turned sharp. "No, I'm here because Earl was just a middle manager. The real operation is much bigger, and now they think this neighborhood is some sort of maritime law enforcement hub." The implications of this statement were interrupted by the arrival of a pizza delivery. 15 large pizzas ordered to Maritime Command Center, Maple Grove Street. "Oh no," Megan groaned. "Ryan, did you order more pizza for your rubber duck navy?" "Actually," the delivery driver said, consulting his order tablet, "these were ordered by someone named Deep Throat of the Deep Sea." Patricia's hand moved to her blazer pocket. "Everyone down." The pizza boxes were quickly discovered to contain not pizzas, but detailed maps of what appeared to be an elaborate network of suburban maritime criminal enterprises. Each box was marked with coordinates corresponding to seemingly innocent locations: community pools, decorative ponds, and suburban boat storage facilities across the state. "This is either a massive break in the case," Monica said carefully, photographing each map, "or the most elaborate pizza-based trap I've ever seen." "Knowing the organization we're dealing with," Patricia replied, "it's probably both." That's when Tim Foster's security system picked up something unusual. Dozens of luxury boats were being moved into storage facilities all around the city. The criminal enterprise was relocating, apparently spooked by the attention on Maple Grove Street. "They think we're some kind of elite maritime task force," Gerald chuckled. "All because of a kiddie pool navy and some rubber ducks." Patricia was already on her phone, coordinating with what she called her assets, but sounded suspiciously like a private naval force. "We need to move quickly. Ryan, how would you like to help with a real maritime operation?" Before anyone could point out the numerous reasons why this might be a bad idea, Ryan had already run inside to get his captain's hat. "Ma'am," Monica interjected, "as a law enforcement officer, I have to point out that we can't actually deputize civilian environmental educators." Patricia finished with a raised eyebrow. "Of course not, but we can use the community's new environmental program as cover for surveillance." Marcus, who had been quietly observing, suddenly smiled. "You know, my organization has been looking to expand its community outreach programs. We could theoretically establish legitimate environmental monitoring stations at all these locations. And that's how the Maple Grove Environmental Education Program became the front for one of the most successful maritime crime investigations in history." Ryan's inexplicable ability to attract attention while talking about maritime law would prove unexpectedly useful, though his suggestion to outfit the neighborhood watch with rubber duck decoys was gently declined. The operation would take weeks to unfold, involving synchronized raids on boat storage facilities, a complex sting operation at a yacht club, and what would become known as the Great Suburban Marina Incident. But before any of that could happen, the neighborhood had to deal with an immediate crisis. Someone had filled the community center pond with what appeared to be remote-controlled miniature submarines, each carrying tiny cargo containers. The sight of Ryan attempting to explain to actual naval intelligence officers why he thought racing rubber ducks against suspicious miniature submarines would be good cover would go down in neighborhood history as either the bravest or most ridiculous moment in the investigation. The truth, as with most things involving Ryan's maritime adventures, probably lay somewhere in between. The miniature submarine situation at the community center pond quickly escalated from suspicious to surreal. The tiny vessels, each about the size of a shoebox, moved through the water with surprising sophistication, their cargo containers gleaming suspiciously in the afternoon sun. Ryan, now wearing both his environmental educator polo and his captain's hat, was practically vibrating with excitement. "We could establish a counter-surveillance operation using my rubber duck fleet," he whispered to Patricia, who was watching the submarines through high-tech binoculars. "They'll never suspect tactical waterfowl." Patricia lowered her binoculars slowly. "Mr. Parker, while I appreciate your creative approach to maritime operations, I don't think engaging in submarine warfare with rubber ducks is quite what we need right now." Monica, who had been analyzing the pond's security footage on her tablet, suddenly straightened. "You might want to see this." She turned the screen to show a series of overnight recordings. The submarines had arrived in what looked like a coordinated deployment, each one surfacing at precisely 3-minute intervals between 2 and 4 a.m. "That's a military-grade deployment pattern," Patricia observed, her expression darkening. "These aren't toys." Mike Anderson, applying his marine mechanical expertise to the situation, had been studying the submarine's movement patterns, the way they're maintaining formation. "These are automated. Someone's controlling them remotely." As if to confirm his assessment, all 12 submarines suddenly shifted position, creating a perfect geometric pattern in the pond. Linda Garcia, watching from her usual gardening spot, dropped her pruning shears. "They're mapping the pond," Gerald realized, his maritime investigator instincts kicking in. But why? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dave Wilson, who had been quietly tracking the submarine's movements in relation to his property line, noticed something odd. "They're not just mapping the pond. Look at their search pattern. They're looking for something specific." Patricia's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Her face went through several interesting expressions as she read it. "Well," she said, "finally, it appears our pond might be more interesting than we thought. According to my sources, about 15 years ago, something valuable was lost in that pond during a police chase, something that certain people have been trying to find ever since." Ryan's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that usually preceded maritime chaos. "Underwater treasure? In our pond?" "Not exactly treasure," Patricia corrected, "more like evidence. Evidence that could potentially implicate some very powerful people in a series of maritime crimes dating back 2 decades. That's when Tim, Foster's security system, picked up something new, a fleet of unmarked vans approaching the neighborhood from different directions. Each one bore the logo of a seemingly legitimate pool maintenance company. "They're making their move," Patricia announced, already typing rapidly on her phone. "We need to secure that pond immediately." Before anyone could stop him, Ryan had already sprinted to his garage, emerging moments later with what appeared to be homemade underwater scanning equipment cobbled together from pool cleaning tools and old smartphone parts. "I've been working on this for the environmental education program," he explained breathlessly, already wading into the pond. "We can use it to..." "Wait, what's that?" His improvised device had started emitting a series of increasingly urgent beeps. The miniature submarines immediately converged on his location, their tiny propellers creating a series of concentric ripples in the water. "Ryan," Monica called out, "I need you to very slowly back away from that spot." But it was too late. The submarines had already initiated what appeared to be some kind of automated recovery protocol. Small mechanical arms extended from their hulls, beginning to methodically excavate the pond bottom around Ryan's feet. "This is amazing," Ryan exclaimed, apparently unconcerned that he was now the center of attention for a fleet of suspicious autonomous underwater vehicles. "Do you think they'll let me study their propulsion systems for my marine technology class?" Patricia was already coordinating with her tactical team. "Mr. Parker, while your enthusiasm for maritime technology is admirable, you're currently standing on top of what might be crucial evidence in a decades-old criminal investigation." That's when the pool maintenance vans arrived, and things got really interesting. Men in surprisingly well-tailored pool cleaner uniforms emerged, carrying what were definitely not standard pool cleaning tools. "Okay, everyone stay calm," Patricia announced to the gathering crowd of neighbors. "My team is in position, and we have the situation under control." As if to directly contradict her statement, Ryan chose that moment to make an announcement of his own. "I think I found something." He reached down into the pond muck, ignoring Monica's shouts to wait for the proper authorities. What he pulled out would change everything. A waterproof case, its surface covered in pond algae, but its seal still intact. The miniature submarines immediately ceased their excavation, their mechanical arms retracting as they initiated what appeared to be some kind of transmission protocol. "Don't open that!" Several people shouted simultaneously, but Ryan was already prying at the case's edges with the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. Inside was a series of documents, somehow preserved despite their years underwater. Patricia quickly secured the case, but not before Ryan caught a glimpse of what appeared to be blueprints for something massive, something that looked suspiciously like a submarine base designed to operate out of suburban retention ponds. "Is this why my maritime sovereignty claims made them so nervous?" Ryan asked, finally wading out of the pond. "Because there really was a secret maritime operation in the neighborhood?" "Mr. Parker," Patricia said, handling the case with gloved hands, "you have no idea how close you accidentally came to uncovering one of the largest maritime criminal conspiracies in suburban history." The fake pool cleaners, realizing their cover was blown, attempted to retreat to their vans. They found their escape blocked by Dave Wilson's strategic deployment of garden gnomes, which had somehow multiplied since the last incident. What followed was a scene that would have been at home in any action movie. If action movies typically featured suburban pond standoffs, remote-controlled submarines, and a soaking wet environmental educator still trying to explain how rubber ducks could have prevented the whole situation. But the drama at the pond was just the beginning. As Patricia's team secured the evidence and began rounding up the fake pool cleaners, a new player emerged, someone whose connection to the suburban submarine conspiracy would make Ryan's maritime adventures seem positively mundane in comparison. The arrival of the mysterious Commodore would prove that in Maple Grove Street, maritime law enforcement was quickly becoming the neighborhood's most unexpected growth industry. The Commodore arrived in a vehicle that perfectly matched his reputation for eccentricity, a converted ice cream truck painted in naval camouflage patterns, complete with a small radar dome on top. The truck's former jingle system had been repurposed to play what sounded like sonar pings, drawing every child and confused adult within earshot to the street. Dr. Franklin, the Commodore Blackwood, Patricia's ex-husband and former Navy submarine designer, stepped out wearing what appeared to be a combination of formal naval attire and what looked suspiciously like an ice cream vendor's apron. His grey beard was immaculately trimmed into the shape of a ship's wheel. "I see you've found my little submarines," he announced, surveying the pond scene with obvious pride. 15 years of remote monitoring, and it takes a suburban environmental educator to finally locate the cache. Fascinating. Patricia pinched the bridge of her nose. "Franklin, what exactly have you been doing with military-grade submersible technology in a suburban pond?" "Testing," he beamed, pulling out a tablet displaying complex sonar readings. "Do you have any idea how perfect these planned community ponds are for underwater acoustic research? The uniform depth, the controlled environment, the complete absence of maritime scrutiny?" Monica was rapidly updating her incident report. "Sir, are you admitting to conducting unauthorized submarine testing in civilian waters?" "Unauthorized?" Franklin looked genuinely offended. "I filed all the proper paperwork. It's not my fault. No one at the zoning office understood that proposed waterfowl observation equipment meant miniature surveillance submarines." Ryan, still dripping from his pond adventure, was staring at Franklin with undisguised admiration. "You turned our pond into a submarine testing facility? That's amazing. I tried to declare it a sovereign port, but this is so much better." "Ah, yes, the sovereign port incident," Franklin nodded appreciatively. "Your maritime enthusiasm actually provided excellent cover for my research. Nobody looks too closely at a pond when there's a man trying to establish a rubber duck navy in his driveway." Patricia's eye twitched slightly. "Franklin, please tell me you haven't been encouraging civilian maritime delusions for the sake of your submarine experiments." "Of course not." Franklin looked hurt. "I merely appreciated the coincidental distraction, though I have to admit, the rubber duck naval formation showed surprisingly good tactical understanding." Before Patricia could respond to this, revelation. The ice cream truck's radar dome began emitting an urgent series of beeps. Franklin rushed to check his equipment, his expression growing serious. "We have incoming bogies," he announced, showing his tablet to Patricia. "Multiple submersible signatures approaching through the storm drain system." "The storm drains?" Monica asked incredulously. "How is that even possible?" Mike Anderson, applying his marine mechanical expertise to the tablet's readings, whistled. "Low. They've modified the drainage system. These aren't just storm drains, they're submarine transit tunnels." Linda Garcia, who had been quietly observing while pretending to water her plants, suddenly spoke up. "Is that why the city's maintenance crew last month wasn't actually from the city?" All heads turned to her. Patricia's hand moved to her phone. "What maintenance crew?" "Oh, they said they were upgrading the storm drain system," Linda explained, casually deadheading a rosebush. "Spent 3 weeks working on it. Seemed odd they only worked at night, and their trucks had diving bells attached to them." Franklin was practically bouncing with excitement. "They've expanded the network, don't you see? The original evidence cache was just the beginning. They've turned the entire suburban drainage system into an underwater transportation grid." Ryan's eyes were wide with possibility. "Does this mean my maritime jurisdiction claims weren't completely unfounded?" "Focus, people," Patricia cut in. "We have unauthorized submersibles approaching through the storm drains. This is not the time to validate anyone's maritime fantasies." That's when Dave Wilson, who had been monitoring his extensive garden gnome security perimeter, noticed something odd. The ground's vibrating. He was right. A low hum was building throughout the neighborhood, and small ripples were appearing in every puddle and water feature. The sound of rushing water echoed from nearby storm drains. Franklin consulted his instruments. They're using the main drainage junction under Maple Grove Street as a staging area. Classic submarine warfare tactic, though I've never seen it applied to suburban infrastructure before. How many? Patricia demanded, already coordinating with her tactical team. At least 12 signatures, Franklin replied, adjusting his sonar settings. No, wait, 24. They've modified the drain system to allow for synchronized submarine movements. I have to admit, from an engineering perspective, it's quite impressive. Ryan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. The environmental education program's water quality monitors. They're not just testing for pollutants, they're tracking submarine movements. Everyone stared at him. Monica slowly lowered her tablet. Mr. Parker, are you saying you accidentally created a submarine detection network while trying to teach children about pond ecosystems? Well, I thought it was weird that the water quality sensors kept picking up unusual metal concentrations moving through the system, Ryan admitted. But I just assumed it was because of all the rubber ducks I lost in the storm drains. Franklin was already examining Ryan's environmental monitoring data on his tablet. This is remarkable. You've mapped their entire movement pattern without even realizing it. The educational sonar buoys, disguised as duck houses, the depth gauges hidden in the water quality stations. You've built a complete submarine tracking system. I did. Ryan looked both proud and confused. I just wanted to show the kids how water moves through urban ecosystems. Patricia was already mobilizing her response team. Intentional or not, we now have real-time tracking of their movements. Franklin, can your ice cream truck's radar system interface with Ryan's monitoring network? Already on it, Franklin replied, hurrying back to his vehicle. Though I should warn you, every time we pick up a submarine signature, it still plays a few bars of "Pop Goes the Weasel." As if on cue, the truck's speakers crackled to life with a bizarre mixture of sonar pings and cheerful ice cream music. Throughout the neighborhood, storm drain covers began to vibrate ominously. The suburban submarine confrontation was about to begin, but no one could have predicted how it would unfold, or how Ryan's seemingly random collection of environmental education equipment would play a crucial role in what would become known as the Great Storm Drain Submarine Standoff of Maple Grove Street. The neighborhood's transformation into an impromptu submarine warfare command center happened with surprising efficiency. Franklin's ice cream truck, now parked strategically next to the community center, had become mission control. Its former ice cream storage compartments were revealed to contain sophisticated sonar equipment, though several display screens still showed the prices for various popsicles. "Contact at Junction 7, Franklin called out, as his radar system played a tinny rendition of "Pop Goes the Weasel." They're using the Madison Avenue culvert as a staging area. Patricia had set up a tactical operations center on what had previously been the community center's bingo night folding tables. Her team, a mix of former naval intelligence officers and what appeared to be reformed maritime criminals, was coordinating with local authorities to secure the neighborhood's drainage access points. Ryan, who had been officially designated as Environmental Surveillance Coordinator, mostly to keep him from trying to organize another rubber duck navy, was frantically cross-referencing his water quality data with Franklin's sonar readings. "The water flow patterns changed 3 weeks ago," he explained, spreading out his charts. "See these temperature variations? Every time we detected unusual metal concentrations, there was a corresponding shift in the thermal imaging from my educational weather station." Monica stared at him. "Your educational weather station has thermal imaging?" "Well, I wanted to teach the kids about microclimate variations," Ryan shrugged. "The infrared cameras were on sale at the surplus store." Mike Anderson, who had been analyzing the drainage system blueprints, suddenly noticed something. These aren't standard storm drain dimensions. Someone's modified the entire network to create submarine-capable channels. That's when Tim Foster's security system picked up movement at multiple storm drain access points throughout the neighborhood. The drain covers were being systematically unsealed from below. "They're surfacing," Patricia announced, her tactical team moving into position. "Franklin, how many contacts?" 24 signatures, moving in formation," Franklin replied, adjusting his sonar display. "They're using a World War II Wolfpack pattern in suburban storm drains. I have to admit, I'm almost impressed." Linda Garcia, who had somehow acquired a set of military-grade binoculars, was monitoring from her strategic gardening position. "We have visual confirmation at the corner of Maple and Oak. They're using some kind of hydraulic lift system to bypass the drain covers." The first submarine emerged partially from a drain near Dave Wilson's prized rose garden. It was roughly the size of a golf cart, painted in urban camouflage patterns that would have been more effective if suburban storm drains were typically decorated in woodland prints. "That's a Whisker-class mini-sub," Franklin observed with professional interest. "I designed those for coastal reconnaissance, not suburban infiltration. Someone's made some fascinating modifications." The submarine's hatch opened, and a figure in what appeared to be a wetsuit, decorated with fake parking enforcement badges, emerged. "This is the Maritime Liberation Front," they announced through a waterproof megaphone. "We are here to establish autonomous submarine zones in all suburban water features." Patricia pinched the bridge of her nose. "The MLF. I should have known. They've been trying to establish underwater micronations in planned communities for years." "You know these people?" Monica asked, updating her increasingly surreal incident report. "They're a splinter group from the Sovereign Boat Captains of America," Patricia explained. "They decided traditional maritime sovereignty claims weren't ambitious enough, so they went underground. Literally, apparently." Ryan, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Wait, I think I know that voice." He stepped forward, squinting at the wetsuited figure. "Uncle Steve!" The figure with the megaphone froze. "Ryan, what are you doing here? I live here. What are you doing emerging from a storm drain in a tactical wetsuit?" "You know the submarine commander?" Patricia asked incredulously. "He's my mother's brother," Ryan explained. "He disappeared 3 years ago after trying to declare his swimming pool an independent maritime nation." Steve lowered his megaphone awkwardly. "The HOA wouldn't let me install a submarine pen in my backyard. Their narrow-minded surface-dwelling regulations forced us underground." Franklin was frantically taking notes. "Fascinating. The psychological impact of restrictive HOA policies on submarine-based sovereignty movements. This could be a groundbreaking paper." "Not now, Franklin," Patricia cut in. "Steve, surface all vessels and power down. We have the entire drainage network surrounded." "Never!" Steve raised his megaphone again. "The suburban underwater revolution has begun. Soon every planned community in America will recognize the authority of our submarine collective." That's when Ryan did something either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. He stepped forward, still wearing his environmental educator polo and captain's hat. "Uncle Steve, remember when you used to take me fishing? You taught me about respecting marine ecosystems. But look what your submarines are doing to our pond's natural habitat. The water quality readings are all over the place." He held up his environmental monitoring charts, which did indeed show significant disruption to the pond's ecosystem. Steve's resolve seemed to waver. The environmental impact reports were inconclusive. He muttered into his megaphone. "I've got 3 months of data showing increased turbidity, altered pH levels, and confused ducks," Ryan countered. "What would Grandma say about you disrupting natural waterfowl patterns with unauthorized submarine operations?" The mention of their grandmother seemed to hit home. Steve's shoulders slumped, causing his fake parking enforcement badges to jingle sadly. "Stand down," he said into a waterproof radio. "Command code Rubber Duck Actual. All vessels surface and prepare for inspection." Throughout the neighborhood, storm drain covers began opening as mini-submarines surfaced. Each one was painted in increasingly improbable camouflage patterns, including one that appeared to be disguised as a mobile hot dog cart. As Patricia's team began securing the vessels, Franklin was practically dancing with excitement over the engineering modifications. Monica had given up on maintaining a normal incident report and was simply recording everything on video for posterity. But the situation wasn't over yet. As the last submarine surfaced, its hatch opened to reveal not another wetsuited revolutionary, but something far more surprising. Evidence of an even larger conspiracy involving municipal water management, competitive synchronized swimming teams, and what would turn out to be the largest underwater real estate scheme in suburban history. Inside the final submarine, meticulously organized in waterproof containers, was a collection of documents that made Patricia's tactical team let out a collective gasp. Blueprints, contracts, and photographs revealed an elaborate scheme that went far beyond unauthorized submarine operations in suburban storm drains. The Atlantis Initiative, Patricia read from a waterproof folder, her eyebrows rising steadily. A comprehensive plan to create an underwater real estate empire using modified suburban drainage infrastructure. Franklin peered over her shoulder at the technical specifications. They've been converting storm drain systems into potential underwater condominiums. The engineering is actually quite innovative, if completely illegal and possibly insane. The mastermind behind this aquatic real estate venture turned out to be none other than Marjorie Blackwater Smythe, the regional director of municipal water management and three-time champion of the Senior Citizens Synchronized Swimming League. "We have visual confirmation," Linda reported from her surveillance position behind a particularly strategic hydrangea bush. "Target approaching in a modified golf cart with... Are those torpedo tubes?" Indeed, Marjorie Blackwater Smythe made her entrance in a golf cart that had been transformed into a land-based approximation of a submarine, complete with a conning tower, periscope, and what appeared to be decorative depth charge racks filled with golf balls. "I see my little submarine. Development project has been discovered," she announced, adjusting her flowered swim cap with dignity. "I suppose it was only a matter of time once young Ryan here started installing his surprisingly sophisticated environmental monitoring equipment." Ryan beamed at the compliment before Monica quietly reminded him that the criminal mastermind's approval wasn't necessarily a good thing. "Mrs. Blackwater Smythe," Patricia stepped forward, "you're under investigation for unauthorized modification of municipal infrastructure, illegal submarine operations, and attempting to establish an underwater real estate empire." "Oh, please call me Marjorie," she smiled, parking her golf cart in perfect alignment with the storm drain grid. "And technically, there are no specific regulations against underwater real estate development in suburban areas. I checked several times with multiple maritime law firms." Franklin was studying the blueprints with increasing excitement. "The synchronized swimming team was just a cover. You used the pool time to test submarine designs and train your underwater real estate agents. The water aerobics class was actually submarine pilot training," Marjorie admitted proudly. "You'd be amazed how similar the skill sets are. Though I do feel bad about Mrs. Henderson. We lost her dentures during an emergency ballast drop exercise." Monica's hand was starting to cramp from trying to document all this in her incident report. "Ma'am, are you saying you turned a senior citizens water aerobics program into a submarine operator training facility?" "Well, we had to do something with our retirement time," Marjorie shrugged. Bingo was getting boring, and the community center wouldn't approve my proposal for an underwater casino. Steve, still in his wetsuit with the fake parking enforcement badges, looked somewhat sheepish. The Maritime Liberation Front was just a front. We were actually the marketing team for the underwater condos. Your revolutionary submarine movement was a real estate scam? Ryan asked, sounding genuinely disappointed. We prefer the term alternative aquatic living development, Marjorie corrected. And it would have worked perfectly if it weren't for your surprisingly thorough water quality monitoring program. Who taught you about thermal imaging? The Discovery Channel, Ryan admitted, plus some YouTube videos about submarine detection that I thought were just naval history documentaries. Patricia was reviewing the documents with growing concern. You've already pre-sold underwater units in 15 different suburban developments. There's a waiting list for the premium torpedo tube adjacent locations. The market for underwater suburban living is surprisingly robust, Marjorie noted, especially among retired naval personnel and displaced sovereign boat captains. That's when Dave Wilson noticed something odd about his garden's irrigation system. Why is my sprinkler pressure linked to the submarine network's hydraulic controls? Franklin rushed to check his sonar readings. The entire neighborhood's water system has been integrated into the submarine infrastructure. Sprinklers, pools, even the decorative fountains, they're all connected. Of course they are, Marjorie smiled. How else would we maintain proper pressure for the underwater monorail system? The what? Several people exclaimed simultaneously. Phase 2 of the development, Marjorie explained, pulling out another set of blueprints from her golf cart's torpedo tube. An underwater public transportation network linking all the suburban submarine communities. We're calling it the suburban rail system. Mike Anderson had been examining the engineering specifications. This is actually brilliant, he admitted. Completely illegal and structurally questionable, but brilliant. They've turned the entire suburban water management system into a potential underwater city, complete with underwater shopping centers disguised as stormwater retention ponds. Steve added proudly, the food court was going to be in old Mrs. Jenkins' koi pond. Linda Garcia suddenly remembered something. Is this why the book club started meeting at the community pool? Were you conducting underwater real estate seminars? The Underwater Book Club was a legitimate literary endeavor, Marjorie sniffed. Though yes, we did use it to test the underwater conference room prototypes. The waterproof Jane Austen novels were a particular challenge. As Patricia's team began securing the evidence and taking statements, Franklin was still excitedly examining the technical specifications. The use of modified pool noodles as emergency flotation devices for the underwater parking structure is inspired. Franklin, Patricia warned, stop admiring the criminal engineering. But Patricia, they've solved the underwater pizza delivery problem. Do you know how long the Navy's been working on that? The situation might have continued in this vein if not for a sudden alert from Tim's security system. The monitoring screens showed multiple unauthorized access attempts at the neighborhood's water main controls. It's the backup team, Steve exclaimed, the Synchronized Swimming Squad's Tactical Response Unit. Sure enough, a convoy of modified water aerobics equipment trucks was approaching the neighborhood, led by what appeared to be a heavily armed pool cleaning vehicle. The Aqua Aerobics Assault Force, Marjorie announced with obvious pride. You didn't think I'd plan an underwater real estate empire without proper security, did you? As the neighborhood prepared for what would become known as the Great Pool Noodle Offensive, no one noticed Ryan quietly updating his environmental monitoring system to track underwater real estate development activities. Sometimes, he reflected, legitimate maritime law enforcement was even more interesting than declaring sovereign boat nations in suburban driveways. The Aqua Aerobics Assault Force arrived with all the subtlety of a synchronized swimming routine performed by tactical submarines. Leading the convoy was Ethel the Barracuda Winters, age 78, former Olympic swimming coach and current mastermind of underwater combat aquatics. Formation Delta Splash, Ethel commanded through her bedazzled megaphone, and the convoy of modified pool equipment trucks executed a perfect pincer movement around the community center. Water aerobics instructors in tactical swimwear deployed from the vehicles, each armed with what appeared to be military-grade pool noodles. "Those aren't standard-issue pool noodles," Franklin observed through his binoculars. "They've been reinforced with carbon fiber and filled with tactical flotation foam. The Navy rejected that design for being too aggressive." Patricia's team was scrambling to establish a defensive perimeter. But how does one defend against senior citizens armed with advanced aquatic exercise equipment? The answer, as it turned out, was in Ryan's surprisingly extensive collection of water balloon launching devices. "I used these for marine ecology demonstrations," Ryan explained, wheeling out what looked like a medieval siege engine designed by a pool party enthusiast. "The trajectory calculations are already calibrated for water-based projectiles." Monica stared at the contraption. "Is that a water balloon trebuchet?" "Multi-barrel water balloon delivery system," Ryan corrected proudly. "Patent pending. I was going to use it for the kids' summer science program." Before anyone could question the educational value of siege weapons in marine biology, Ethel's forces made their move. With a coordination that would have impressed military strategists, the Aqua Aerobics Assault Force began their synchronized attack. "Deploy the tactical water weights," Ethel commanded, and dozens of modified aquatic dumbbells were rolled into position, creating a mobile barrier of waterproof exercise equipment. Franklin was practically giddy with excitement. "They've weaponized water aerobics equipment. The floating resistance bands are being used as tripwires, and those kickboards have been reinforced to function as tactical shields." "Franklin," Patricia sighed, "please stop admiring the enemy's equipment modifications." Linda Garcia, who had somehow acquired a complete set of tactical gardening gear, was monitoring the situation from behind her strategic shrubbery. "They're setting up some kind of aquatic exercise equipment perimeter. Those resistance pools aren't just for water aerobics anymore." She was right. The Aqua Aerobics Assault Force had begun deploying portable resistance pools, normally used for rehabilitation exercises, in a pattern that suggested they were creating a network of tactical water features. "It's a hydraulic defense grid," Mike Anderson realized, analyzing the setup. "They're using the portable pools to create a controlled water flow system. If they connect it to the storm drains, they could reactivate the submarine network." Franklin finished, his voice filled with equal parts horror and admiration. Marjorie Blackwater Smythe, still seated regally in her modified golf cart submarine, smiled. "Phase 3, the aquatic resurrection. Did you really think we'd surrender our underwater real estate empire so easily?" That's when the true genius of the Aqua Aerobics Assault Force's plan became clear. The portable pools weren't just defensive positions, they were access points to the underground submarine network. Each one was equipped with a miniature airlock system disguised as a pool ladder. "Begin Operation Synchronized Submersion," Ethel commanded through her bedazzled megaphone. On cue, her forces executed what appeared to be a standard water aerobics routine, but was actually a complex series of tactical movements. "They're using water aerobics hand signals to coordinate their attack," Franklin exclaimed, frantically taking notes. "The butterfly stroke is actually a code for submarine deployment." Ryan, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "The environmental monitoring system is picking up something weird. The water pressure in all the drainage systems is changing in a pattern." He pulled up his monitoring data on a tablet, revealing a series of regular fluctuations in the neighborhood's water system. To everyone's surprise, the pattern matched. The rhythm of singing in the rain. the same song the synchronized swimming team used for their regional championship routine. They're using synchronized swimming patterns to control the submarine network, Patricia realized. The water pressure changes are choreographed to music. Indeed, the entire aqua aerobics assault force had begun moving in perfect synchronization, their tactical pool noodles cutting through the air in precise formations. With each movement, the water pressure in the drainage system shifted, creating a symphony of hydraulic controls. Dave Wilson's garden sprinklers suddenly activated, but instead of their usual pattern, they began moving in time with the choreography. Throughout the neighborhood, water features sprang to life in perfect synchronization. The entire water distribution system is being controlled through synchronized swimming movements, Franklin marveled. It's brilliant, completely insane, but brilliant. Marjorie smiled from her golf cart submarine. 15 years of synchronized swimming championships weren't just for the gold medals. We were perfecting our hydraulic control techniques. That's when Ryan's water balloon trebuchet came into play. With surprising accuracy, he began launching what he called his tactical marine research devices, water balloons, filled with his special pH testing solution that left bright colors wherever they burst. If we can track their movement patterns, with the dye, we can predict their hydraulic control sequence, he explained, launching another volley of scientifically enhanced water balloons. The neighborhood had become a battlefield of color, with Ryan's pH testing dye creating a rainbow pattern that revealed the complex water control system the aqua aerobics assault force was using. But just as it seemed the situation couldn't get any more surreal, a new player entered the scene. From the direction of the community pool came the sound of bagpipes playing Scotland the Brave underwater, heralding the arrival of someone who would change the entire dynamic of the aquatic confrontation. Angus Mackenzie, former Royal Navy, submarine commander and current president of the Synchronized Swimming Bagpipe Appreciation Society, had arrived with his own unique solution to the underwater real estate crisis. His appearance, riding what appeared to be a modified golf cart equipped with both bagpipes and sonar, would mark the beginning of what would become known as the Great Aquatic Musical Standoff of Maple Grove Street. Angus Mackenzie's arrival, in his bagpipe-equipped golf cart, created a moment of stunned silence in the aquatic battlefield. His vehicle, which he had dubbed the Highland Submarine, was a masterpiece of Scottish maritime fusion engineering. Solar-powered bagpipes were mounted on the roof, each drone pipe modified to function as both musical instrument and sonar emitter. "Ye called for underwater musical backup?" he asked, his Scottish accent thick enough to spread on toast. "The Synchronized Swimming Bagpipe Appreciation Society stands ready to assist." Behind him, a convoy of golf carts appeared, each equipped with its own set of waterproof bagpipes and carrying members of what appeared to be the world's only underwater Scottish military pipe band. Ethel, the Barracuda. Winters lowered her bedazzled megaphone. "The Scottish contingent. I should have known they'd get involved eventually." "You know these people?" Patricia asked, watching as the bagpipers began deploying their instruments with military precision. "They're our main competitors in the Underwater Musical Combat League," Ethel explained. "Their synchronized swimming bagpipe routines are legendary in aquatic entertainment circles." Franklin was examining the bagpipe sonar hybrid systems with obvious delight. They've modified traditional Highland bagpipes to emit sonar frequencies that can counteract underwater control systems. The Navy's been working on musical submarine disruption technology for years. "Aye," Angus nodded proudly. "Turns out, Amazing Grace played through properly calibrated bagpipes can interfere with any hydraulic control system. The underwater acoustics are particularly effective against synchronized swimming-based command protocols." Ryan's environmental monitoring system suddenly began picking up new patterns in the water pressure fluctuations. The bagpipes are creating some kind of resonance in the drainage network. It's disrupting the synchronized swimming control frequencies. Indeed, throughout the neighborhood, the carefully choreographed water features began to falter. The aqua aerobics. Assault Force's tactical pool noodle formations wavered as their hydraulic support systems were thrown into chaos by the bagpipes' sonic interference. "Deploy the emergency water aerobics routine," Ethel commanded, but it was too late. The bagpipes' rendition of Scotland the Brave had created a standing wave pattern in the drainage system that completely disrupted their synchronized control methods. Marjorie Blackwater Smythe stood up in her golf cart submarine, her flowered swim cap quivering with indignation. "You can't stop an underwater real estate empire with bagpipes. That's not even a recognized form of maritime warfare." "Actually," Monica interjected, consulting her increasingly bizarre incident report, "there's no specific regulation against the use of Scottish musical instruments in suburban aquatic combat situations." That's when Angus revealed his master stroke. From each golf cart emerged members of his pipe band, wearing what appeared to be tactical kilts equipped with waterproof sporrans containing sonar equipment. "Form the aquatic Highland battle formation," he commanded, and the pipers arranged themselves in a pattern that Ryan immediately recognized from his water flow studies. "They're creating a musical hydraulic interference grid," he exclaimed, watching his monitoring systems light up with new data. The bagpipe harmonics are matching the natural resonance frequency of the storm drain network. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Throughout the neighborhood, the hidden submarine infrastructure began responding to the bagpipes' sonic commands. Pool noodle weapon systems seized up, tactical water aerobics equipment malfunctioned, and the underwater real estate empire's control system was thrown into complete disarray. Linda Garcia, still monitoring from her tactical gardening position, couldn't help but laugh. "They're fighting synchronized swimming with synchronized bagpipes. This is better than the time the book club tried underwater poetry readings." The Aqua Aerobics Assault Force tried to counter with their own musical routine, attempting to regain control of the water systems through a hastily organized water ballet version of Singin' in the Rain. But they were no match for the combined force of Scottish determination and properly calibrated bagpipe acoustics. "Fall back to the emergency aqua-size positions," Ethel commanded, but her forces were already in disarray, their tactical pool noodles drooping in defeat. Marjorie Blackwater Smythe watched as her underwater real estate empire literally went down the drain, defeated by an elderly Scottish submarine commander and his bagpipe-playing golf cart militia. "I don't understand," she said, slumping in her golf cart submarine. "Our synchronized swimming control systems were perfect. How did you know about the acoustic vulnerabilities?" Angus smiled, adjusting his waterproof kilt. "Lass, I've been studying underwater musical warfare since before you were doing water aerobics. The bagpipes have been the secret weapon of submarine combat for generations." As Patricia's team began securing the scene and collecting what had to be the most unusual evidence in law enforcement history, Franklin was already drafting a research paper on the military applications of synchronized swimming and bagpipe acoustics in suburban warfare. The neighborhood's drainage system, freed from its role in underwater real estate development, returned to its normal functions. The submarines were confiscated, the tactical pool noodles were decommissioned, and the portable resistance pools were converted back to their original therapeutic purposes. Ryan, whose accidental creation of a sophisticated environmental monitoring network had helped expose the whole scheme, was offered a position as the neighborhood's official water systems and maritime activity coordinator. His first act was to establish a legitimate marine education program, though he had to promise not to include any lessons on declaring sovereign boat nations or underwater real estate development. The synchronized swimming bagpipe appreciation Society was honored with a special commendation from the Municipal Water Management Board, and Angus Mackenzie's Highland submarine golf cart was put on display at the community centre, its bagpipes still occasionally emitting sonar pings during particularly humid weather. As for Marjorie and her aqua aerobics assault force, they were sentenced to community service teaching actual water aerobics to senior citizens, though they were strictly prohibited from including any tactical maneuvers or submarine deployment techniques in their routines. The story of the Great Storm Drain submarine standoff became neighborhood legend, passed down through generations of residents and occasionally reenacted during particularly elaborate community pool parties. The only physical reminder of the underwater real estate empire was a single rubber duck wearing a tiny kilt, which had somehow found its way into the community center's trophy case. Dave Wilson's Rose Garden, which had suffered some damage during the final bagpipe battle, eventually recovered and even won first prize in the county flower show. The judges were particularly impressed by the unusual blue tint of his roses, though no one mentioned that it might have been caused by Ryan's pH testing dye. And so peace returned to Maple Grove Street, though residents swear that on quiet nights, when the sprinklers are running and the moon is full, you can still hear the faint sound of bagpipes playing Scotland the Brave through the storm drains, keeping watch for any signs of unauthorized underwater real estate development. 6 months after the Great Storm Drain submarine standoff, Maple Grove Street had transformed into something unexpected, a legitimate center for maritime education and environmental research. The community center pond, once the site of underwater real estate schemes and submarine warfare, now hosted actual marine biology classes taught by a much more professionally qualified Ryan. His environmental monitoring network, expanded and properly licensed, became a model for suburban water quality management programs across the country. The former Rubber Duck Navy commander had found his true calling, teaching children about marine ecosystems while only occasionally slipping into stories about the time he accidentally helped thwart an underwater real estate empire. The Aqua Aerobics Assault Force, under strict supervision, had been reformed into the Maple Grove Senior Aquatic Environmental Protection League. Their tactical pool noodles were repurposed for legitimate water quality testing, though Ethel occasionally had to be reminded that water aerobics routines should not include submarine deployment protocols. Marjorie Blackwater Smythe, after serving her community service sentence, channeled her organizational skills into developing actual legitimate water conservation programs. Her underwater real estate schemes were converted into serious proposals for sustainable water management, though she was permanently banned from using the phrase submarine-adjacent property development in any official documentation. Franklin and Patricia reconciled their differences over proper maritime law enforcement techniques and co-authored a groundbreaking paper on the application of musical acoustics in suburban water system management. Their research on bagpipe-based sonar technology earned them an Ig Nobel Prize, which they displayed proudly in the community center next to the kilted rubber duck. Dave Wilson's Rose Garden, enriched by the accidental application of Ryan's pH testing dye, produced a new strain of blue roses that became known as submarine blue. The local garden society was both impressed and slightly concerned, especially when the roses seemed to respond to bagpipe music by changing shades slightly. Linda Garcia's strategic gardening positions were officially recognized by the Neighborhood Watch program, and her elaborate network of decorative shrubs was revealed to contain a sophisticated water quality monitoring system disguised as garden gnomes. She maintained her cover as a simple gardening enthusiast, though her new greenhouse was suspiciously well-equipped with underwater surveillance technology. The Highland Submarine Golf Cart Patrol, under Angus Mackenzie's leadership, became an official Neighborhood Watch auxiliary unit, providing musical deterrence against any future attempts at unauthorized maritime development. Their weekly bagpipe practice sessions, while somewhat hard on the eardrums, proved remarkably effective at preventing any further submarine incursions through the storm drain system. Mike Anderson's marine mechanical expertise was put to legitimate use, maintaining the neighborhood's new environmental monitoring equipment, though he occasionally had to explain to enthusiastic residents that no, their kiddie pools did not need sonar systems or emergency submarine protocols. Tim Foster's security system, enhanced with underwater acoustic sensors, became a model for suburban water infrastructure protection. His cameras still occasionally picked up mysterious ripples in puddles during full moons, but these were officially attributed to routine water quality fluctuations rather than ghost submarines. The community center's trophy case now housed an eclectic collection of mementos from the Great Submarine Standoff, a decommissioned tactical pool noodle, a waterproof Jane Austen novel from the Underwater Book Club, and of course, the legendary kilted rubber duck, which had somehow acquired its own small fan following among local maritime history enthusiasts. Monica's incident report, initially dismissed as too bizarre for official filing, was eventually published as a training manual for suburban maritime law enforcement. It became required reading at police academies nationwide, though most officers assumed it was a work of fiction until they encountered their own cases of unauthorized submarine activity in residential areas. The storm drain system, thoroughly inspected and restored to its original specifications, still occasionally emitted sonar-like pings during particularly dramatic thunderstorms. Local children claimed they could hear bagpipe music in the drains during heavy rain, though this was officially attributed to acoustic resonance in municipal water infrastructure rather than ghostly Scottish submarine patrols. Uncle Steve, reformed from his submarine revolutionary days, became a legitimate environmental consultant, specializing in water conservation and proper pool maintenance. His expertise in underwater operations was put to use training the next generation of marine biologists, though he was required to sign a strict no submarine warfare clause in his contract. The Synchronized Swimming Bagpipe Appreciation Society continues to hold regular practices at the community pool, their unique combination of aquatic grace and Highland musical tradition drawing curious spectators from across the state. Their annual Submarines and Sonatas performance became a beloved community tradition, even if nobody quite understood how they got the bagpipes to work underwater. Ryan's original boat, the catalyst for all this maritime mayhem, was eventually donated to a maritime museum as part of an exhibit on unusual suburban naval operations. It sits there today, a testament to how one man's misguided attempt to establish a sovereign boat nation in his driveway led to the complete transformation of a quiet suburban street into a legitimate center for marine education and environmental research. The neighborhood's annual Submarine Awareness Day celebration became a quirky local festival, featuring water balloon trebuchet demonstrations, synchronized swimming performances with bagpipe accompaniment, and educational presentations on proper marine ecosystem management. The highlight each year was the ceremonial launching of a rubber duck wearing a tiny kilt into the community center pond, symbolizing the unusual alliance that saved the neighborhood from underwater real estate development. As for the mysterious blueprints found in the last submarine, they were sealed in a waterproof container and stored in the community center's archives. A reminder that sometimes the strangest threats to suburban peace come not from above, but from below, through the storm drains and hidden waterways that run beneath our feet. The story of Maple Grove Street's transformation from quiet suburb to accidental maritime law enforcement hub lives on, passed down through generations of residents. New neighbors are still surprised to discover that their seemingly normal community has a surprisingly robust water quality monitoring system and an unusually high number of residents who know how to operate sonar equipment. And on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the sprinklers are running in perfect synchronization, residents swear they can still hear the faint sound of bagpipes playing through the storm drains, keeping eternal watch over the peaceful waters of their suburban paradise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.